Hi, welcome to the 14-day weather forecast. If I take a look around my garden at the moment, I can see lots of these things, but none of this stuff. Is that going to be changing through the next 2 weeks? In a word, the answer is possibly. With that said, I'll start by taking a look at the view across Europe and the North Atlantic. The animation here, based on data from the GFS model, runs from 18 GMT, Wednesday the 11th. At the outset, things are very similar to how they have been for much of the month. A vigorous Atlantic flow pushing right across the UK. It's bringing showers, longer spells of rain and strong winds. Temperatures, at least in the southern half of the country, often close to or above the average. In the short term, nothing really changes. It's wet at times, it's windy at times, drier interludes. But then as we go into the weekend, an area of low pressure starts to pull away eastwards into Scandinavia. That results in winds turning into a north or northwesterly direction, and colder air begins to move southwards. Increasingly, showers fall as sleet or snow down to lower levels and in southern parts of the UK as well as the north. On this particular animation, the snow is shown by white and pink shading. So you can see at this point, possibly a little bit of snow over high ground in Wales, also northern England. But the key thing to appreciate is that at this range, the details are becoming increasingly uncertain. There's just a general trend which is likely to be towards colder and more wintry conditions. As I run this through to its conclusion, it's quite a changeable scene. The colder air does move southwards, then a ridge moves over the UK, another band of rain, then it's followed by colder air again, and an area of low pressure pushes southwards. There's a lot going on here. It finishes with a risk of wintry showers in the north and the west, 00 GMT, Thursday the 19th. But for takeout, as I really want to emphasize, is that transition towards the potential for it to be more wintry from Saturday onwards. Keep up to date with the short range forecasts as the time approaches. Will there be sleet or snow around like this is suggesting? I'll try and address that in a little bit more detail shortly. But it's also worth taking a look at the air temperature sequence associated with the GFS model. This is at about 1,500 meters above sea level. To start with, the light blues and light greens over the UK show that it's not a particularly cold or mild air mass running through this. It's similar in the short term, but then later on, increasingly, these dark blues move southwards. They indicate cold air at this time of the year. Finishing here, 21 GMT, Wednesday the 18th. All areas under at least a relatively cold air mass. What does that mean in terms of the temperatures that we can expect down at the ground level? 15 GMT, Thursday the 12th. At this point, we've got that rather mild setup still. Double figures over England and Wales, 10s, 11s, 12s. Colder in Scotland. Moving forwards to Saturday, temperatures have dipped a little bit, but still double figures there in the London area, the southeastern corner, East Anglia. Chilly to say the least in Scotland. Also, it will be turning colder through the nights later on as well. And I'm just using these particular charts to illustrate the trends rather than the specific details. The overnight lows on Sunday night, so into Monday morning, 06 GMT, very cold if it's right in Scotland. The Scottish Glens dipping down to around -11. Even in southern and central Britain, -2 or -3. The risk of frost returns widely Monday afternoon. Now, maximum temperatures in the south are 6 or 7 Celsius. It's very cold in Scotland, an ice day in the Highlands with temperatures staying below freezing. Finally, on the GFS data, 15 GMT, Tuesday the 17th. It's now cold or very cold everywhere, even in the south. Maximums around 3 or maybe 4 Celsius. And in Scotland, it's another ice day with temperatures widely staying below a freezing point. There is some uncertainty, as I've said, about how things are going to be developing through the second half of the first week. So I just thought I'd bring up the Met Office Mogreps G ensemble temperature plot for Tuesday the 17th. It's showing the forecast values at 15 GMT. Each one of the stamps, as they're called on this plot, is representing the output from one of the individual runs within the ensemble model. And the idea is to really look for clusters to see the most likely solution. Are many of the runs going for a cold outcome, or are they in a minority? And if you freeze frame it, you can go through them in your own time. But to summarize, most are showing a cold or rather cold picture. I think those 2s, 3s and 4s, which the GFS was suggesting in southern England on Tuesday, are probably at the lower end. 5, 6 or 7 Celsius looks more likely according to this data. And also it is progressively colder as you head northwards, which is what the GFS was pointing towards. But there are still a few runs in the set here which are going for a significantly milder outcome. It could well be to do with the timing of those cold pulses moving down from the north or the northwest, because I mentioned that briefly, at least on the GFS animation, milder air returned before another pulse of cold moved downwards. But as I say, it really is an uncertain picture, other than it's probably going to be turning colder. Now, will it snow? That's a big question many people ask. Here's the GFS snow depth chart for Wednesday the 18th. Treat with extreme caution. It's showing snow covering virtually the whole of the UK. It's only parts of, I think, the Thames Valley there and East Anglia which are missing out. In fact, in the west and the north, there are some very deep accumulations being forecast. Northern Ireland, even the Republic of Ireland, seeing very significant amounts of snow. But why should you treat this with extreme caution? Well, 2 reasons. One, the GFS often, in my experience, over forecasts snow depths in the UK. And secondly, snow depth forecast charts in general from all of the models are not very accurate, especially when looking this far ahead. And just to try and illustrate that, here is the Mogreps G snow depth forecast for the same time as the GFS chart. Again, each one of these stamps, as they're called, represents the forecast output from one of the runs in the ensemble model, the UK on each one. And what you can see is that most of them are showing accumulations of snow in Scotland, but as you head southwards, most of them are not. A few are, for example, this one here. But in general, there is a lot of blank space over the United Kingdom and Ireland as well, which is suggesting there won't be any snow on the ground at this point, Wednesday the 18th. So treat this one with care, because it's not the be-all and end-all. When, as I say, when we're looking more than a few days ahead, there's always going to be inherent uncertainty in trying to pinpoint snow falling, let alone accumulating. But I suspect in general terms it's going to be closer to the mark than the GFS chart was. Nonetheless, keep an eye on the short-range forecasts. Things could change. In terms of precipitation in general, so forecast accumulations through days 0 to 5, rain and snow in millimetres. The ECM model on the left, the GFS output on the right, both quite consistent, wettest in the north and the west, but all parts of the UK seeing some rain at least. Going forwards, days 0 to 10, the totals have continued to rack up in the west and north particularly. The orange shading there indicating over 100 millimetres being forecast in parts of Western Scotland and Northern Ireland on both of these forecasts from the 2 different models. So a wet scenario in the north and the west, rain in central and eastern counties too, but not as much. A better chance of drier periods. And as I've suggested, some of this precipitation may well be falling as sleet or snow, at least for a time through days 5 onwards, I would think. Well, do the deterministic models all point towards that rather cold and wintry picture which the GFS was suggesting? Just to recap, here is the GFS, Wednesday the 18th, low pressure moving into Scandinavia and cold air moving down across the country. Here's that little area of low pressure which was showing up on the animation. as I suggested, it could bring longer spells of rain, sleet or snow to parts of the UK, but it's really very, very uncertain. At this range, it's just that rather wintry picture which is important to take on board. High pressure ridging northwards in the Atlantic, and that's really working with that area of low pressure moving into Scandinavia and allowing this colder Arctic air to move down across the country. The Canadian model, very similar. If anything, it looks like high pressure is going to be building further northwards, leading to a greater chance of a longer, colder spell across the UK. The German icon, similar here, high pressure ridging northwards in the Atlantic, low pressure maybe a little bit further east, so the colder air struggling to move down across the UK, but it really is the generalities rather than specifics which should be focused on, and the pattern on the first three here is very similar. The European ECM next, once more it's the same story, colder air moving down across the UK, high pressure in the Atlantic, areas of low pressure to the north. And finally, the UK Met Office Global. I think here again the patterns maybe shifted a little bit further west, this area of low pressure, just there centred to the northwest of Scotland and more of a westerly flow moving across the country, but probably quite chilly nonetheless. High pressure there building northwards further west in the Atlantic. But good consistency in terms of the general theme by this stage. Details are varying, and it's the details which will really determine whether there is a significant risk of snow at this point, or it could just be that we end up with more of a westerly flow and it's rain apart from over high ground in the northern half of the country. Details to be firmed up. Well, with a potentially rather wintry end to week one, how are things looking as we go through week two? Trends and probabilities at this range, of course, starting with the GEFS ensemble data for London. Air mass temperatures, again at about 1,500 metres above our heads, are plotted across the top half. And the signal here is for a cold start. You can see this is the colder period, which for GFS was shown and which I've been discussing. It continues into the start of week two, but then there is a clear trend back towards average air mass temperatures. Some of the runs are still in the colder than 30-year norm category. That's the 30-year norm shown by the thick black line. But generally, they are fluctuating around it. Quite a mixed picture, but temperatures recovering as we go through the second week, becoming close to the average. The rain or snow risk, that's shown across the bottom. The spikes show precipitation, and the number of runs which are forecasting snow on a given day is shown by the snow row. It reaches a maximum in the London area of 18, and that's around the 18th or 19th of January. That's 18 out of 33. So it is a significant risk. More than 50% of the runs are forecasting some snow to fall. But as I always point out, it could just be a flake or two mixed into a shower of sleet. It doesn't have to be accumulating snow. It's not what it's showing at all. And the snow row numbers decrease sharply later on towards the end there. They're around 2, 3 or 4. There are still some spikes showing up, so there's an ongoing risk of rain. So possibly a chance of some snow falling early on. Then it's rain, but not that many rain spikes. I would expect there to be a reasonable amount of dry weather if this is correct. And it's just worth as well taking a look at the European ensemble for London, showing air mass temperatures, because it's very, very similar to the GEFS. Below the norm to begin with as we go into the second week, but then that recovery, and there are some notably mild runs appearing there worth keeping an eye on. It could be to do with how high pressure is orienting itself to the south of the UK, maybe leading to a southwesterly flow, but that's pure speculation. The takeout here is that the ECM, like the GEFS, is indicating that air mass temperatures will be recovering at least in the south of Britain through the second week. The 2-metre temperatures, so the ground level ones for the London area associated with the GEFS model. Through the end of the first week, many of the runs are going into this dark green category. Those are ones forecasting a maximum between 1 and 5 Celsius on a given day, but the number of them decreases through the second week. It's the light greens which start to dominate. Those are runs going for maximums of between 6 and 10 Celsius. So after that cold start at the beginning of the week, the trend is towards milder conditions, at least back towards average. Going up to Manchester to see the picture from the northwest of England, the air temperature profile really very similar. It's below the norm to start off with, the ensemble mean, the thick purple line below the thick black line, the 30-year average, but it trends upwards, and through the rest of the period it's just hovering very close to it. So similar to the London plot. In terms of rain and snow, perhaps a few more precipitation spikes here through the second week, but not that many more than there were on the London one. The snow row values reaching a maximum of, I think, 26 there on the 17th of January or around about it, dip downwards, going to 5, 4, 7, 5, trending downwards there through the second week, a reducing risk of snow as temperatures start to recover. And the GEFS 2-metre temperature data table for Manchester really, again, reinforces that message. It's quite similar to the London one. There is more dark green than was on the London plot, but even so, it's a light green which becomes dominant, so temperatures recovering. Up to Glasgow, slight differences here. The air mass profile is suggesting below average temperatures throughout the second week. The ensemble mean, the thick purple line, is staying below the thick black line, but after a cold start, it's really just hovering a little bit below it, a degree or two, and there is quite a big spread of potential outcomes. So I'd say that that cold will be easing in Scotland, but temperatures may be staying just a little bit below the average through the second week, or at least through much of it. The chance of snow decreases. The snow row values there, 24, 20 towards the end of the first week, still quite high or moderately high as we go into the second, 13 on the 21st of January, but towards the end there, they also fall away quite sharply into single figures. So an ongoing risk of rain, snow early on, but that chance falls progressively through the second week. More precipitation spikes actually than there were on the London and Manchester plot, so a greater chance of something falling out of the sky, and increasingly towards the end there, rain rather than snow, if it's correct. The 2-metre temperatures for Glasgow, the dark greens and blues are making up the majority through the first half of the week. So the blues, of course, are the very cold runs, 0 Celsius or lower. The dark greens are the relatively cold ones of this part of the UK. There is a significant amount of light green, mild runs, but it doesn't increase that much. There's a weak trend there perhaps later on, as I say, towards that cold easing, but temperatures may be staying just around or a little bit below the average even later on down at the ground level. The GEFS 10-day surface level pressure mean forecast, so Saturday the 21st of January, what it's suggesting is a positive North Atlantic oscillation pattern, so high pressure to the south or southwest, low pressure close to Iceland, maybe just a little bit east of it, and an Atlantic flow across the UK. So by this point, possibly returning back towards something similar to what we have at the moment, with a difference that high pressure could be having more influence from the south than it is in the short term, but milder than the days which precede it. So it looks like, if this is correct, we're going to be losing that north or northwesterly flow and winds going back into more of a westerly direction. But as I always point out with these charts, they are generated by averaging out all of the individual perturbations in the ensemble. So in the case of the GEFS, that's 30. And when you do that, it can lead to a blended solution which isn't really representative of what the different clusters in the ensemble are forecasting. But it does have some value, and the ECM, mean surface level pressure chart, the same thing, but from a European model, also looks quite similar. I think if anything here, the high pressure to the south is having more influence. The Atlantic flow increasingly becoming confined to the northern half of the UK, so a greater chance of drier periods in southern and central counties, if it's correct. And it could, of course, as well lead to an increasing risk of nighttime frosts. Again, it would really depend on how far northwards the high pressure built and whether or not we ended up under a mild southwesterly flow, like I pointed out that some of the individual runs within the ensemble were suggesting. That if a high pressure builds just a little bit further north, that southwesterly flow gets cut off, and at least in southern Britain, the chance of frost would increase once more. The data table showing mean surface level pressure from the GEFS model for York going forwards. So the last two charts were for a specific date. This is the data table representing the next 16 days. Each column represents the output for one day from all of the runs in the ensemble. Yellows and oranges show mostly pressure above the average. There are a few in the yellows which are close to or below it, I think, but generally the yellows and oranges are going to be above the average at this time of year. So there is a signal for higher pressure later on. I could have picked locations further south, and if anything, the signal would have been a little bit stronger, but York's quite representative, being fairly central in the UK. So if it's correct, the chance of drier conditions possibly starts to increase towards the end of the second week. And that's really reinforced by the GEFS postage stamp plots for the 22nd. It's a weak signal, but in general terms, high pressure having more influence in the south. The thing to look for on these, rather than the details of the isobars, really is the shading, the colour of the shading. Yellows and oranges show higher pressure, and the blues and purples lower pressure. The UK is slap bang in the middle of each of these individual stamps. So I think there it's really pointing towards high pressure in the south being possibly a more significant player than it will be in the north. Very, very typical pattern, really. Last week I mentioned and discussed sudden stratospheric warming and the stratosphere. There was quite a lot of interest in that, so I just thought I would give an update. I'm not going to talk about what sudden stratospheric warming is, but the impact it has on the weather is just worth recapping. It increases the chance of it turning cold in mid-latitude locations such as the UK, maybe 2 or 3 weeks after it happens. Is a SSW now looking likely? Here's the latest 16-day GEFS plots showing zonal winds at 60 degrees north. A reversal, so if runs fall down here, would indicate a SSW being very, very likely or having taken place. Well, in the short term, the mean zonal winds continue to be fairly well clustered there, and they don't dip away at all. But towards the 25th of January and beyond it, there is a downwards trend. We're not seeing an SSW here at this point by any means, but if that trend continues in subsequent updates through the coming days, there is a chance that an SSW may be set to take place towards the end of January or the first half of February. Certainly something to watch out for. And if that happened, the chance of cold weather may be starting to increase around Valentine's Day and beyond. So I've already answered this question, is an SSW imminent? No, it isn't, but do keep an eye on late January and the first half of February. Right, well, to summarise the next 2 weeks. Week 1, it starts changeable with showers, the longer spells of rain and strong winds. Temperatures fluctuate, but increasingly it begins to turn colder. And that leads to a greater chance of snow and frost from really around about the 15th of January. Snow is most likely in the northern half of the UK, but some of the computer models are bringing the chance of it southwards. It's definitely something to keep an eye on. I wouldn't be surprised if parts of southern Britain see at least some transient snowfall. Week 2, probably starting cold. There is that chance of showers or longer spells of rain, sleet and snow. Once more, the greatest chance of snow over high ground in southern Britain and lower levels in the north. The signal is for temperatures to begin recovering though, particularly in the southern half of the UK, and there are some indications that higher pressure will be developing towards the end. Exactly what impact that will have is difficult to say beyond that it would lead to a chance of drier conditions. It could also bring a renewed risk of nighttime frosts, but it really depends on where that high pressure builds and whether or not we end up under a mild and mucky southwesterly flow. So, there we have it. A taste of winter, quite probably towards the end of the first week and into the early part of the second. That chance of snow, it's very difficult to quantify. I would say it's pretty high in the north. The Pennines, the Scottish mountains, that's a no-brainer. Significant amounts of snow look to be strongly favoured. And even at low levels in the north, I think there could well be some accumulations. Whether or not they make it down to the south, a much more open question. I'm not ruling out snow. I'm keeping my fingers crossed, certainly here in the Chilterns, but maybe there will be at least a temporary covering. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. As ever, if you did, then please remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons below. Thank you for watching now. Bye.